Government has gazetted South Africa's national minimum wage increase to 30 Rand and 23 cents an hour. That's from 1 March. It's a move that's going to impact an estimated 5.5 million workers across the economy, including farm and domestic workers. Now, while the hike was widely expected, it lands at a time of intense cost of living pressure for households and tightening margins for employers, with compliance enforcement also ramping up. So I want to discuss in a little more detail what this increase really means in practice. I'm joined by John Botha, Labour Relations Expert, Joint Chief Executive Officer at Global Business Solutions. So, John, a warm welcome to you. 30 Rand 23 an hour sounds modest. In real terms, does this meaningfully protect workers against today's cost of living?
The short answer to that, Jeremy, is you have to look at it in the context maybe of the last 5 years. As you know, the national minimum wage is renewed every year in March by the National Minimum Wage Commission. So if you look at the increases on a compound annual growth rate, Jeremy, over the last 5 years, we're looking at a 6.8% annual increase on a compound growth rate. Now, that is more than double CPI, if one had to, express it in that manner. Whether or not it is sufficient to help the 5.5 million individuals with the massive cost of living increases that is not represented in CPI, in other words, the cost of food, the cost of transport, etc., that's a different question, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
For labour-intensive sectors, John, and I'm thinking of agriculture, maybe even the hospitality industry, I wonder if this increase is absorbable, or do you think there is the danger, the risk that it could push some businesses closer to the edge, if not to closure?
Jeremy, the short answer to that is I think there are problems on the horizon, and I'll tell you why. For example, domestic workers, we see a dramatic decrease in the number of domestic workers over the last 3 to 4 years that are employed. My memory serves me correctly, 200,000 to 300,000 domestic workers that are no longer employed. So we've seen a tremendous fall off in the number of domestic workers employed. Now, if that is an indicator, one must say, but why is it that's happening in a household, for example? So consumer spending, disposable income is under pressure, as you indicated. And then on top of that, you've got these regulatory increases. And then even workmen's compensation, Jeremy, traditionally wasn't extended to domestic workers. And then we had a constitutional court case that said domestic workers need to be covered because the unfortunate incident was a domestic fell into the pool and drowned, and the Constitutional Court said, well, it's unconstitutional not to have domestics covered. So I think what I'm trying to say is you've got this, you touched on it when you opened today's session, is you've got this ambiguity. You've got the organizations that are under the hammer. We've got massive disruption with technology and automation and mechanization. We've got very low labor productivity in South Africa compared globally. And then on the other hand, you've got this rising minimum wage rate that, albeit very low still, is definitely having an impact on the labor market.
John, we know that enforcement is becoming more data-driven, but how successful is it?
Enforcement is something that needs to be lamented on, Jeremy. The enforcement of the national minimum wage, as with various other aspects of law, has been historically poor. Lots of organizations not paying the national minimum wage. So I must say Department of Labour have tried to step it up. Their Inspectorate and Employment Services Division is a lot more active than they used to be. And they've also changed the legislation to include, for example, under employment equity, that if a company is not paying the national minimum wage and they found out, they lose their employment equity certificate, which means they lose access to business tenders. So they're also trying to have this economic penalty as a potential threat. So for companies, especially reputable companies, if they don't comply and they're caught out, they're toast.
We also know, John, that outsourcing and labour brokers are increasingly common in South Africa. I'd be interested to know where the legal liability sits when a minimum wage breach occurs.
That is a very good question, Jeremy. Yeah, organizations are trying to reduce their payrolls, and the only way they do that is to outsource, subcontract, and use TESs or labor brokers, as you indicate correctly. And we see the migration of these new workforce models increasing dramatically. The truth of the matter is, when a labor broker or TES is involved, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act appropriates joint liability between the client and the labor broker. So, clients right now, and I think that's where you're heading, they'd better be talking to their labor brokers to adjust their pay rates, to adjust the contributions, to ensure they're not found wanting, because if a broker is in breach, the client is automatically in breach as well.
Just a final one, and maybe looking ahead, John, if wages keep rising but productivity doesn't, what gives first? Is it margins, jobs, or prices?
Oh, my goodness. The truth of the matter, and Jeremy, I've studied this because I'm a keen academic in the context of disruption and the impact of that on the workplace. But the truth of the matter is, the labor productivity in South Africa has been dropping tremendously. If you look at the increase in the wage rates and the commensurate productivity trends, in fact, NEDLAC published a beautiful graph last week or the week before with their quarterly review, where they showed that there's a massive disconnect between wage inflation and productivity. There's almost an inverse relationship. So now the more you're paying, it's almost the less productive organizations are becoming. So where does it give? In my view, technology, automation, artificial intelligence, mechanization is going to be front of mind. Robots don't go on leave. They don't injure themselves at work. They don't have UIF and workman's comp, and they're a smattering or fraction of the cost of remuneration for a year. You can pay 30,000 Rand for a bot rather than 300,000 Rand for a labor relations officer. So it's going to give. Margins are under pressure. The labor market's under pressure. I think we're going to see unemployment grow significantly. You see the automotive industry, like with the Nissan plant now and the 𝗕cie acquisition of that plant. So, Jeremy, I think we're in for the high jump. And the sad thing is, we still remain the most inequitable geography in the world when the Gini coefficient is brought into the mix. So it's a very sad situation, to be honest.
John Botha, as always, thank you very much for the insight. Labour Relations Expert, Joint Chief Executive, Global Business Solutions. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.